Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy today's episode.
Time passed swiftly, and before everyone knew it, the grand event of the Divine Empire would commence in 3 days. The security within the capital city of the Divine Empire, Xavier City, had become stricter. But that didn't stop the flow of people who had come to participate in its founding anniversary. It was also then that Victor and Tristan arrived at the bustling capital. Both of them had undergone a strict screening, but the two didn't mind it one bit. While they were being interviewed by one of the high-ranking Templars of the Divine Army, the teleportation gate behind them glowed faintly. A moment later, a dozen people appeared, and the two standing in front of them were two of the VIP guests that the Divine Army was expecting to arrive. The High Templar who was interviewing Victor and Tristan politely excused himself before greeting the guests who had just arrived in their capital city. "Welcome to Xavier City, Your Majesty." The High Templar bowed his head in a very respectful manner. "We have been waiting for your arrival. Please, allow my subordinate to guide you to your accommodation." The one whom the High Templar referred to as Your Majesty was a handsome elf who seemed to be in his early 40s. He was none other than the High King of the elven city of Espoir Frieden, a kingdom that was said to be as old as the kingdom of Agartha and shared a similar level of prestige. He was none other than Hirswitha's father, Casimir L. Frieden. Truth be told, he didn't want to attend this founding anniversary because he still held a grudge about what the Divine Army had done to his daughter. However, after hearing that the one who was about to be executed was none other than his daughter's disciple, JAP, the High King of the High Elves decided to go. Casimir was one of the supremes of the elven race. He also brought a dozen saints with him, including his nephew, Lorelei, who had insisted on coming with him. Victor could only sigh as he watched the elven delegation walk past him. He wished that he had the same status as them, which would make everyone treat him with such reverence and respect. A minute later, the teleportation gate once again showed signs that a new batch of people was about to appear. This teleportation gate could only be used by the VIPs who were personally invited by the highest-ranking members of the Divine Army, which made many people wonder who was about to make their appearance. After a few seconds, a dozen people appeared in front of the teleportation gate. This time, the group was led by the Dragon King of Karsvar Draconis himself, and he also brought his people with him. On his right side was Cephas' grandma, Lady Faustina. Surprisingly, there were 3 young ladies beside her, whom Lux would immediately recognize if he was there to see them. They were none other than Valerie, who was wearing her disguise, and her 2 handmaidens, Ali and Ari. She had insisted on coming with her father to the Divine Empire because she was very worried about Lux. Valerie didn't know where Lux went after learning about what happened to his master, but she was certain that he would definitely make his appearance on the execution day to save his master, GAAP. She had been unable to sleep for the past few days due to anxiety, so when her father mentioned that he'd go to the Divine Empire, she insisted on going with him no matter what. Surprisingly, the Dragon King agreed to let her go with him. He knew that he couldn't let his daughter remain ignorant of the world, which was why he decided to take her with him. Hopefully, she'd understand that life wasn't filled with only butterflies and rainbows. Similar to what happened earlier, they were respectfully led away by the high-ranking members of the Divine Army, causing everyone to look at them with reverence. But just as they were about to leave, the teleportation gate activated again and, this time, the representatives of the Crystal Palace, led by the steward, Lady Augustina, appeared. Valerie smiled weakly and waved at the handsome dragon prince, who was standing beside his aunt. Smiled and gave Valerie a brief nod of acknowledgement. Due to the complex relationship between Karsvar Draconis and the Crystal Palace, he didn't want to appear too friendly, fearing that the dragon princess might get punished for her carefree actions. "Let's go, "Yes, Aunt." The steward of the Crystal Palace and her entourage walked past the Dragon King, not even bothering to give him a second glance. Picoro even sneered at Valerie's father, which showed how much dislike he had for the fake king of the dragon kind. The Dragon King didn't take Picoro's action to heart and simply made a gesture for the guide to take them to their residence. Soon, everyone settled down. A few minutes later, Victor and Tristan were guided to their accommodation by one of the officers of the Divine Army. Compared to the treatment that the VIPs received from the Divine Army, the treatment they received showed the difference between heaven and earth. However, Victor was still happy because they were given a luxurious residence that befits his rank as king of a kingdom. High above the tower of the Divine Palace, the oracle lightly tapped her finger in a large bowl of water. She was using her divination in order to find Lux's whereabouts, but her effort didn't result in anything. The oracle wasn't too disappointed by this result because this wasn't the first time that she had done such a thing. People who had strong ties with fate weren't easily affected by divinations. As a progenitor, Lux's fate was very strong. This was why the Divine Army wasn't able to lock onto his location despite their ability to see anything past their borders. It doesn't matter where you are, the oracle mused as she looked at the surface of the water that reflected her beautiful appearance. 3 days from now, you will appear in the capital whether you like it or not. The oracle smiled as she gazed at the city where the different powers of the world were gathering. They had prepared a grand stage for the Necromancer of Heaven, and she was looking forward to an entertaining show. A Heaven's Necromancer? The oracle sneered. Such heresy. Without another word, the oracle of the Divine Army disappeared in a shower of sparks. There were still some final preparations to make. She would ensure that the moment the half-elf made his appearance, she would mark the end of his life with her own hands, or had invited Valerie to have tea with him because he knew that the dragon princess was feeling very anxious. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he too was feeling quite anxious, and he had been unable to sleep for the past few days due to worry. Seeing the dark circles on the plain-looking girl's face, he knew that he wasn't alone in his suffering. Or, do you think that Sir Lux will come? Valerie asked. She already knew the answer to this question, and yet, she still asked it, hoping that Or would give her a different answer to ease her worries. He will come, Or replied. We both know this already. The only question is what will happen after he makes his appearance in the Divine Empire. Valerie's hands, which were holding a teacup, trembled. She lightly bit her lip before putting her cup on top of the table and lowering her head. Ali and Ari wanted to give Valerie a hug, but they decided to hold their ground. They knew that their mistress was suffering, but they also understood that they couldn't treat Valerie like a child forever. She needed to mature and cope with the unfairness of the world. Perhaps this same reason was why the Dragon King had allowed Valerie to come with him to the Divine Empire. Picoro, who was there to serve as Or's bodyguard, sighed in his heart. Although he had a few grudges with Lux, he didn't want the half-elf to be captured, or worse, killed by the Divine Army. He had fought side by side with Lux in the Abyss, and witnessing his death firsthand would definitely leave a bitter aftertaste in his mouth. A silence fell in the balcony because Or and Valerie didn't want to continue the discussion. They knew that no matter how much they tried to sugarcoat their words, GAP would definitely die in 2 days, and there was a possibility that Lux would follow him to the grave. While the two were feeling depressed, a beautiful elf landed on the balcony, making Picoro and the 2 handmaidens frown. Who are you? Picoro asked. Be at peace, Dragonborn, the beautiful elf replied. My name is Lorelei, and I hail from the kingdom of Aspor Frieden. I was just minding my own business when I heard someone mention Lux's name. Because of this, I decided to investigate. Are you perhaps his acquaintances? Valerie and Or looked at the beautiful elf, who had called herself Lorelei, with a frown. Do you know Sir Lux? Valerie asked. Where did the two of you meet? Lorelei smiled as she gazed at the plain-looking girl in front of her. You could say that Lux is my rival, Lorelei replied. The two of us fought together, after which he promised to visit me in Aspor Frieden. As to where we met, I'm sorry, but I can't tell you. Or arched an eyebrow as he looked at Lorelei from head to foot. Are you sure that you are his rival? Lux didn't mention anything about having a rival. Of course he didn't. Lorelei smirked. This is a secret between the two of us. Lorelei was, of course, lying. After losing to Lux, she treated the half-elf as her rival, but the red-headed teenager didn't even consider her to be his rival. Naturally, Lorelei wouldn't disclose this kind of information. She was merely using her connection to Lux to learn more about the 2 dragons, who seemed to have a close relationship with the half-elf that defeated her. Truth be told, the elf wanted to know more about Lux. But, Since even her own master had only seen the half-elf in the ancestral lands, she was unable to gather more information about him. Now that she had overheard others talking about the red-headed teenager, she decided to introduce herself and dig some answers out of them. Or, who didn't trust people so easily, decided to pry some answers from the elf, who claimed to be Lux's rival. "You said that you are from Isporfrieden, right?" Or smiled. "Tell me, what is the stance of your High King in regards to the execution of the heretic?" Lorelei frowned because she didn't expect to be asked a political question. "I am not aware of His Majesty's stance in this matter," Lorelei replied. "I just tagged along because the halfling about to be executed is an acquaintance of my master." "Oh? So you just came here to watch Lux's master get executed?" Or smirked. "Is this your own version of entertainment?" The frown on Lorelei's face deepened after sensing the sarcasm in Or's voice. Her uncle, the Elven King, had told her the identities of the people who were in the VIP area of the Divine Empire. This meant that she should mind her manners and not antagonize any of them. Otherwise, it might lead to political tensions between their kingdoms. "Regardless of what I feel on the matter, it doesn't change the fact that I am unable to change anything," Lorelei replied. "I am merely a ranker. My rank and status are not enough to put a stop to this execution. Since we are on this subject, do you know how many Supremes and Saints are currently within the Divine Empire?" Or nodded. 50 Supremes and thousands of Saints. Right now, a fifth of this world's strongest people are here in the Divine Empire. "That's right," Lorelei smirked. "The two of you are clearly on Lux's side. So, tell me, can the two of you do anything to stop this execution?" The beautiful elf glanced at the city from the balcony and shrugged. "I don't know how many Supremes have allied themselves with the Divine Empire," Lorelei stated. "But I can say for certain that there are at least 2 Supremes who are working with them, the Beast King Zayden and the Supreme Sorcerer Finnegan. Although I don't know if they will move to help the Divine Empire capture Lux, his chances of leaving this place alive are very slim. If I were him, I'd just take revenge on the people here after they have left the Divine Empire. It is simply impossible to make waves in the presence of so many powerhouses." Lorelei shook her head helplessly before slowly floating off of the ground. "If the two of you are really Lux's friends, you should convince him to stay as far away from this place as he can," Lorelei said. "His life as a half-elf may not last for thousands of years, but if he bides his time until he can become a saint or a supreme, it will not be too late to have his revenge." With that, Lorelei left without a second glance. She truly didn't want to see Lux die, and she was hoping that Valerie and Or had a way to contact him. His master had told her that they had sent one of their men to help save JP. However, she didn't believe that a single person could save the halfling and escape the Divine Empire alive. After Lorelei had left, Valerie and Or exchanged glances with each other. Both of them knew that the beautiful elf was right. They currently didn't have the strength or power to make a difference and save Lux's master from being executed. 2 days later, countless men and women sat in the great plaza of Xavier City, which was the capital city of the Divine Empire. They had not only come to celebrate the founding anniversary of the Divine Empire, but to also witness an execution, which held great significance to one of the biggest organizations in Elysium. The VIP guests were all seated on a floating platform that hovered several hundred of meters from the ground. All of the figures sitting there were either Supremes or the highest-ranking officers of the Divine Army, like the Oracle. Standing on the elevated platform in the plaza was none other than the High King of Lunaria. He had his hands clasped behind his back as he stood beside the guillotine, which would later be used to kill the halfling they labeled as heretic, who had destroyed his entire kingdom and wiped out his royal bloodline. Mondo had patiently waited for this day to arrive. He wanted nothing more than to torture Lux and let GAAP see his disciples suffering. The saints of the Divine Army made sure to monitor his every movement so that he wouldn't attack the halfling before the day of the execution. The sun was already at its zenith, and GAP was currently being escorted to the plaza by dozens of saints. The crowd, who was watching all of these from a distance, couldn't help but pity the halfling who was about to be used as a warning to those who have bad intentions towards the Divine Army. When the saints reached the elevated platform, they proceeded to tie JP to the guillotine. After double-checking that the magical chains were still in effect, they all backed away and stood several meters away from the halfling. Suddenly, a voice filled with charisma and power spread in the surroundings. "Everyone, thank you for coming to the founding ceremony of our empire." A middle-aged man, wearing the ceremonial clothes of a pope, said with a smile. "Today is a special day because not only are we celebrating the continuous prosperity of our empire, but we will also be punishing a heretic whose crimes know no bounds. Not only has he repeatedly defied our divine army, but he is also responsible for committing genocide, wiping an entire kingdom from the face of the world. Death will not be enough to pay for his sins, but it is the only punishment we could impose upon him in order to appease the countless souls of the kingdom of Lunaria." The sovereign of the divine army paused as he glanced at the halfling, who was tied to the guillotine before making eye contact with the High King of Lunaria. Seeing that his chance had arrived, the saint casually walked towards the guillotine and gave JP's body a kick, making the latter spit out a mouthful of blood. "It brings me great joy to personally end this heretic's life," Mondo said as he scanned the crowd, trying to see if Lux was somewhere within the crowd of people who had come to see JP's execution. The sovereign of the divine army, the oracle, as well as the other saints, were also using their divine sense to look for the half-elf and the members of Memento Mori who might have come to their divine empire. Mondo gave GAAP another kick before stepping on the halfling's foot, crushing it completely. GAP bit his lips in order to prevent himself from crying out. He understood what the High King of Lunaria was doing. Mondo didn't plan to kill him right away and, instead, proceeded to torture him. This was something that the sovereign of the divine army and the High King of Lunaria had agreed upon. Simply put, they were just delaying the time of his death to give Lux the opportunity to come to save his master. Killing GAAP right away wouldn't serve the biggest purpose of their faction celebration. "Do you have any last words, heretic?" Mondo asked with a sinister smile on his face. GAP spat a mouthful of blood before slowly raising his head to look at the people in front of him. "The time we spent together wasn't long, but they still hold some of the happiest moments of my life after my master died at the hands of these murderers," GAP said softly, and yet, his voice reached everyone's ears as if he was speaking right next to them. "I didn't know if my master, Hirswith, felt pride when she made me her disciple. But I will tell you this, I am very proud and very blessed to have a disciple like you, Lux. So, please, watch carefully. Watch as I end the life of the people that killed my master and wipe their empire from the face of the world." Mondo, who immediately felt that something was wrong, slashed the rope that was holding the guillotine in place. The deadly artifact, whose sharpness could easily cut through steel, descended towards the halfling's head, who had just declared that he would wipe out the divine empire from the face of the world. Just as the blade was about to sever GAP's head from his body, three things happened at the same time. Two gigantic hands emerged from the elevated platform. One of these hands grabbed the High King of Lunaria in a vice grip, while the other crushed the guillotine into pieces. A moment later, a gigantic head rose up from the ground, and a mad chuckle that shook the entire divine empire escaped Antero's lips. "Kill him, Antero," GAAP, who was still tied up by magical chains, ordered. The golem of destruction raised the hand that was holding the High King Lunaria in a firm grip. "Nu!" Mondo roared in anger, fear, and frustration when he found himself nearing Antero's mouth. A resounding crack was heard as Antero bit the saint's body in half, making the spectators scream. Blood sprayed from the golem's mouth as he held the lower half of Mondo's body in his hand. The High King of Lunaria died just like that, failing to even take revenge for his kingdom that had been destroyed by the same golem who ended his life. Antero chewed for a few seconds before tossing the remaining half of the saint's body into his mouth. The foolish members of the divine army really thought that the halfling was unable to summon Antero due to the magical chains that bound his body. Truth be told, Antero could appear with just a single thought from GAP, so no matter how much they tied him up, he could still call forth the golem of destruction and let him rampage to his heart's content. At the same time that this happened, a powerful explosion rocked the capital city of the Divine Empire, which was why the sovereign wasn't able to save Mondo from being killed. He had sensed a greater danger coming from the sky. Because of this, he focused his attention on erecting a barrier to shield the people in the plaza. The Divine City had several barriers that were always active to protect it from any incoming threat. However, the sovereign's instincts were telling him that these protective measures wouldn't be enough to contain the threat that he had just felt. As if making his worst fears come to life, the outer barriers of the city shattered like broken pieces of glass, leaving only two defensive barriers between the threat and the people below, which the sovereign had erected at the last second. The highest official of the divine army narrowed his eyes as he looked at the heavens. High above the sky and meeting his glare, two people hovered in the air. One was Hannah, who was part of GAP's covenant, and the other was none other than the red-headed half-elf, who had come to save his master from those who wished for him to die. GAP grinned as he raised his head, looking at his disciple and Hannah, who were hovering in the sky. Antero had already crushed the chains that bound his body and prevented him from using his abilities. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that you already know my name," JAP stated as Antero stood behind him, creating a pressure that made everyone listen to his words. "But if you don't know who I am, allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is GAAP, and I am Lady Hearswith's disciple. I have come to destroy the Divine Empire and its army. So, if you don't wish to die, stay out of my way. Likewise, if you decide to side with my enemies, be prepared, for I will not show you any mercy." The halfling raised his hand, and immediately the members of GAAP's covenant appeared. "Break your seals," AB ordered. "The time to fight has come." All of GAAP's covenant members were all Empyrean-ranked world bosses. After breaking their seal, their strength drastically rose, and they directly broke through the Calamity rank. With another wave of the halfling's hand, countless undead monsters of different shapes and sizes appeared in the surroundings. All of them radiated an unholy aura, scaring the spectators in the plaza to run away as they screamed. "Members of the Divine Army, hear my command," the sovereign of the Divine Army of Light shouted, his voice spreading through the entire Divine Empire. "Purge the heretics in accordance with heaven's will." Hundreds of saints moved at the same time and engaged the undead legion that JAP had summoned. "Help the Divine Army," one of the kings whose kingdom was affiliated with the Divine Empire shouted. "Cleanse this land of filth. Arg, arg." The king wasn't able to finish his words because Antero's fist smashed his body, turning it into meat paste. Seeing this scene, the guests of the Divine Army split into two groups: those who had no intention of helping them, and those who were affiliated with them. The elves of Aspor Frieden, the dragons of Karshvar Draconis, and the Crystal Palace were among the factions that chose not to side with the Divine Empire and simply watched from the side. Not far from the plaza, Tristan looked at his father. He was wondering whether his father would choose to help the Divine Empire in order to form a good relationship with them or stay neutral and watch from the side. Victor wasn't aware that Tristan was currently waiting for him to make his decision. He was currently in a state of shock as he stared at the half-elf in the sky, who was also his daughter's fiancé. Just what is going on? Victor thought. Why is this dumb kid poking a hornet's nest? Does he have a death wish? Fortunately, Victor was a man who could quickly adapt to any situation. After recovering from his shock, he grabbed Tristan and flew away. Since Lux was already his daughter's fiancé, he decided to not interfere with the battle. However, he wouldn't do anything to help the half-elf either. The Divine Army was one of the biggest organizations in Elysium. Despite JP's momentum, Victor believed that it was only a matter of time before he was suppressed. There were 50 Supremes and thousands of saints gathered in the Divine Empire. If they couldn't deal with a demigod and a few Calamity-ranked monsters, then they would have long ago been defeated by the Abyssal monsters, who had come to conquer their lands. The sovereign of the Divine Army glanced at Antero before shifting his gaze to the half-elf in the sky. Right now, the halfling was being protected by the golem of destruction, so the easiest persimmon to pinch was none other than the red-headed half-elf, who had shattered the barrier of his capital city. "Maeve, can you deal with the half-elf?" The sovereign of the divine army asked the oracle seated beside him. Yes, Maeve answered. Leave that brat to me. They had already prepared a team that would deal with the half-elf if he ever appeared to rescue his master. The sovereign nodded and engaged the golem of destruction, who was busy fending off the saints that were attacking JP. The oracle and 100 saints rose toward the sky in order to capture Lux. In their eyes, Lux was just a measly rancor. How could he possibly resist hundreds of saints who were several times stronger than him? When Valerie and her saw this scene, both of their faces turned pale. Valerie was the first one to break her silence as she pleaded with her father to save Lux. Just watch, Valerie, the Dragon King replied without even looking at his daughter. This is the reality of the world. There are strong people, and there are weak people. The strong will always use their powers to oppress the weak and have their way. Valerie already had a feeling that her father wouldn't agree to her request, so she looked at Lady Faustina, who stood beside her. I'm sorry, Valerie. Lady Faustina shook her head. Our hands are tied right now. Tears welled up in Valerie's eyes out of frustration and despair. Ollie, who wasn't able to bear her suffering, hugged the dragon princess. At that moment, the feelings that she had been holding back burst like a broken dam. She clung to Ollie and cried, her tears falling like rain. Ari hugged Valerie from behind, preventing her from seeing the carnage that was happening around them. The three of them were only weak women who would instantly die if they were to interfere in a battle of this magnitude. Or bit his bottom lip while clenching his fists. His gaze was locked on the half-elf who was about to be attacked by hundreds of saints. But despite his frustrations, the Dragon Prince realized that Lux was still looking very calm. It was as if the saints that were flying in his direction didn't pose a threat to him. Lux stared at his master on the ground with a frown. Although Antero and his master's covenant members were strong, their opponents weren't pushovers. Aside from the sovereign of the Divine Empire, 4 other supremes had joined the battle. All 5 of them worked together to keep Antero busy, while the saints focused on dealing with the halfling's calamity rank protectors. Right now, his master was fighting against 5 supremes and over 100 saints. The half-elf knew that it was only a matter of time before they managed to land a clean hit on his master, whose rank was only that of a grade A apostle. Lux, they're almost here, Hannah reported. Lux nodded as he scanned the faces of the saints who were flying in his direction. Immediately, he found the Oracle of Light at the rear of the formation. Out of all the members of the Divine Army, his master hated 2 people the most. The first was the High King of Lunaria, who was already dead. The second was none other than the Oracle of Light, who had captured the halfling and used him as a hostage to make Hirswith stop her resistance. Let's go, Hannah, Lux said. Time to make them understand what we heretics can do. Hannah smiled and held Lux's hand. Immediately, the 2 of them teleported thousands of meters up in the sky, turning into 2 black dots in the sky that were nearly impossible to see from the ground. Of course, the saints could see them perfectly fine, so they increased their speed as they soared towards the heavens. For some reason, the Oracle of Light had a bad premonition, so she slowed down her flight speed to prepare for any kind of situation. Lux then pointed his finger toward the flying saints, and something flew out of his storage ring. The object was flying so fast that all the saints could see was a blur. It was at that moment that the Oracle of Light remembered something. Her eyes dilated and she immediately shouted, warning the saints that were under her command. "Scatter and evade that thing at all cost," the Oracle shouted. The saints, who heard her warning, all paused for a bit before heeding her command. However, just as they were about to take evasive actions, a sneer appeared on the half-elf's face. "T, Motherf Kurs." The hypersonic bomb that he had unleashed detonated mid-air, drowning dozens of saints in an explosion that could wipe 2 entire cities from the face of the world. An earth-shaking eruption detonated in the sky, making the saints who were affected by the blast scream in pain. A powerful shock wave blasted down toward the ground, giving everyone in the Divine Empire a hard time breathing due to the strength of the blast. It was as if all the oxygen in the vicinity was blown away. The Supremes, who had decided to not join the battle, couldn't help but widen their eyes in shock due to the raw power of the explosion. It made them wonder if they could survive a direct hit from it. Victor, who saw this scene, shuddered because he was secretly hoping that Lux would be killed by the Saints, freeing his daughter from their engagement. He was so certain that the half-elf wouldn't be able to escape with his life that he was already starting to think about how he would tell his daughter about his death while pretending to be aggrieved by the loss of his soon-to-be son-in-law. Victor was certain that if Lux used that kind of attack against the Xeno Kingdom, all of them would be erased from the face of the world, without even knowing how they died. It was at that moment when he remembered what his wife had said about Lux when they were having a serious talk about Aina's current situation. Well, although things didn't work out the way you planned it to be, I have a feeling that the current situation is infinitely better, Felicia stated. Lux may not be a member of a royal family, but you have to admit that he has the ability to become an overlord. If I were you, I would invest in this future son-in-law of ours. Victor couldn't help but smile bitterly after recalling what his wife, Felicia, had said. He didn't know whether investing in Lux was a good thing or a bad thing. But one thing was certain. He no longer wanted to make the handsome half-elf his enemy, even if he had to personally preside over Lux's and Aina's wedding. "Father, what's wrong?" Tristan asked. "You look pale." Victor laughed after hearing his son's words. "Tristan, look at that person closely." Victor pointed at the half-elf in the sky. "That person is your sister's fiancé." Tristan stared at his father with a dumbfounded look on his face. At first, he thought that his father was just teasing him, but after seeing how serious Victor's expression was, he felt as if their entire family had stepped upon a landmine. "Father, don't say anything. Let's see how this battle unfolds." Victor once again shifted his attention to the sky with a solemn look on his face. If Lux actually survived this battle, he decided to have a heart-to-heart talk with him and discuss his future with Aina. The Oracle, who had been far from the explosion, was unscathed, but she couldn't help but shudder despite surviving the explosion. When she first pursued Lux's floating island alongside a dozen saints, she had experienced this kind of power firsthand. Although her life was spared, she had received serious injuries, which took some time to recover from. Just a glance was enough to tell her that the weapon of mass destruction that Lux had used was stronger than the one that was used against her, which made her body shudder a second time. At that moment, she noticed something in the corner of her vision, which was flying through the sky at great speeds. Waving her hand, several mirror-like artifacts appeared around her, serving as an observer and a protector at the same time. Glancing at one of them, the Oracle saw what seemed to be a black coffin flying towards one of the saints that was falling from the sky. She watched in horror as the coffin rammed the saint, hitting his defenseless body, and sent him flying backward. However, before the saint could fly far, the lid of the coffin opened, and a shadowy hand extended to grab the saint's foot, pulling him towards its dark interior. After absorbing the saint, the black coffin turned and faced west. Suddenly, from the dark smokescreen that was caused by the explosion, a Dracolic appeared holding two heavily injured saints in its claws. Avernus, who noticed the Oracle looking at him from a safe distance, chuckled before tossing aside the two saints in his hand. A second later, he used his tail to strike the two saints, similar to a baseball bat, hitting a baseball ball, sending them flying toward Blackfire. The black coffin acted like a professional baseball catcher and happily caught the two saints before using its shadowy hand to give Avernus a thumbs up. The Dracolic chuckled and imitated the gesture before flying toward the other saints, who were barely floating in the sky. Blackfire had already captured 12 near-death saints, which was a glorious addition to its master's 100,000-strong army that it was trying to complete. Sensing the Oracle's gaze on it, the mischievous black coffin glanced in Maeve's direction. A moment later, a childlike laughter reverberated in the sky, making those who heard it feel their hearts turning cold. "Little Oracle of Light, please wait and see," Blackfire said in a teasing tone. "Very soon, you will belong to me." After saying those words, Blackfire flew toward the remaining saints who were at death's door. Even though the black coffin could no longer be seen, Maeve felt all the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end after hearing the childlike words that were aimed at her. She had already identified the black coffin as a divine artifact, and after seeing what it did to the 3 saints that it had devoured, she knew that it was something that she must avoid at all costs. Although there were over 20 saints that had been injured by Lux's attack, the rest were able to react in time and activate their defensive artifacts, preventing themselves from getting injured. The survivors all gathered beside the oracle as they stared at the half-elf who was looking down on them with contempt from the sky. "What's wrong?" Lux asked in disdain. "Don't want to catch me anymore?" The half-elf then summoned a blast bomb from his storage ring and threw it towards the group of saints that had banded together. "Retreat," the oracle ordered, and this time, all the saints heeded her command like their life depended on it. They all steered clear from the trajectory of the blast bomb, making Lux laugh in his heart. What he threw just now was an ordinary blast bomb that Eiko had given him before she left to go off on an adventure of her own. Seeing the horrified look on the oracles and the saints' faces, Lux was very tempted to laugh out loud, but he held it back with his willpower. Now was not the time to laugh. He and his master still needed to get away from the Divine Empire. However, since his master was busy fighting against the true powerhouses of the Divine Army, he decided to start his Plan B. The half-elf unleashed 2 hypersonic, nuclear-type blast bombs that were capable of wiping out an entire city. He aimed them at strategic locations within the Divine Empire, which would destroy their most important establishments, namely their Divine Temple and Divine Barracks. Since his master wished to see the world burn, he would help him with everything he had. The Divine Army had long gotten on his nerves, and since they wanted to act high and mighty, he would bring them down a peg and make them understand that even a ranker like him could flip their delusional world upside down. 2 explosions that shook the land took place at the same time. The Supremes, who were spectating the battle and had no intention of joining, raised several barriers to protect themselves and their people from the aftermath of Lux's weapon of mass destruction. A scream of anger escaped the oracle's lips when she saw that the half-elf had destroyed the Divine Temple, which served as her primary residence in the Divine Empire. That place contained their organization's valuable tomes that preserved the history of Elysium, martial techniques, and ancient spells, as well as some of the artifacts that were in their possession. "I'll kill you," the saintess shouted at Lux. "I won't let you leave this place alive." The half-elf glanced in the oracle's direction and casually threw a bomb in her direction. The saints, who had survived Lux's first strike, all scattered because they thought that the hypersonic blast bomb that he just unleashed had the same firepower as the one that destroyed the Divine Temple and the Divine Barracks. No matter how furious she was, the oracle was still able to think properly and hurriedly flew away in order to evade the explosion that would follow afterward. However, instead of a powerful explosion that could destroy cities, only a small explosion occurred. Lux had thrown another regular blast bomb to scare off the annoying oracle and the saints who were eyeing him. When they realized that the half-elf had tricked them for the second time, these saints, who stood above all the rankers in the world, felt humiliated by Lux's casual disregard for their dignity. What they didn't know was that Lux had a limited number of nuclear-level blast bombs, which meant that he couldn't just use them freely. Also, the red-headed teenager succeeded in his goal of making the saints hesitant to attack him. After all, they wouldn't know if the bomb he was about to use against them could potentially kill them. However, before the saints could even glare in the half-elf's direction, they found out that he was no longer there. Hannah had used her spatial ability to take the red-headed teenager closer to the plaza. Their goal was to rescue GAAP, and that still hadn't changed. Although their enemies were now wary of him, they were still deep in enemy territory. If he and his master, GAAP, could overwhelm the entire Divine Army of Light with just the 2 of them, then the Abyss would have long invaded Elysium if they were really that incompetent. Truth be told, if the Divine Sovereign, as well as the 5 Supremes that were helping him, went all out, GAAP would have long perished. However, they didn't do that. The reason? It was because of Antero. The Golem of Destruction had this one uncanny ability to reflect any kind of attack instantly to anywhere he wanted on the battlefield. Of course, this ability couldn't be used consecutively, and it had a cooldown of a few minutes before it could be used again. But here was the catch. Antero knew if an attack was truly powerful. If one of the Supremes were to really use their full power, and it was reflected by the golem of destruction to one of them, they would suffer from serious and even near-death injuries. For a Supreme, this was not an ideal scenario. They were the strongest people that stood at the apex of the world. This meant that if they were injured, even the rarest of elixirs and most powerful of healing potions had very little effect on them. This was also why the sovereign of the divine army took decades to recover from the injury he received in the past. None of the Supremes dared to take this risk, so they were only attacking with saint-level attacks. This was the sole reason why JAP was still able to resist despite the fact that he was up against 6 Supremes. Suddenly, Lux appeared in front of his master who had considerably aged after summoning Antero. "Master, let's escape," Lux said as he held onto JP's arm. "We need to leave here before it's too late." "No, Lux." JP shook his head. "You are the one who should leave this place. It's already too late for me." The halfling looked at his disciple with a smile, and his gaze looked at the half-elf with pride. "Leave this place, and don't think about avenging me," AP stated. "All the hate and suffering will end here with me." "Master, I don't understand," Lux said with a solemn expression on his face. "Please, come with me." AP patted Lux's hand, who was holding onto his shoulder. "No, Lux," GAAP replied. "I'm sure that you understand. You must have already felt it, right?" The half-elf didn't release his grip on his master's arm, making the halfling sigh. "I allowed them to capture me on purpose so that they would bring me inside the Divine Empire," JAP said. "It is simply impossible for me to infiltrate the heart of their organization on my own. That's why I decided to create a ruckus and wipe out Mondo's entire kingdom while I was at it. Fortunately, these fools thought that they had captured me with their own strength and brought me here to the place where I wanted to go. I am very happy that all of them are incredibly stupid. Heck, even a baboon is smarter than them." GAP didn't bother to lower his voice. On the contrary, he even asked one of his covenant members, the Gothic Lolita, Carol, to amplify his voice, enough to be heard by the entirety of the Divine Empire. The sovereign who heard this confession couldn't help but redden due to anger and shame, for he allowed the sneaky rat to enter his divine city. The oracle and the other saints of the Divine Empire also felt their cheeks burning out of embarrassment. GAAP didn't hold back, insulting them right in front of their guests and people under their wing. A chuckle escaped the Dragon King's lips because he found this whole situation funny. He had also concluded that JAP had intended for this to happen, so he wasn't too surprised when he heard the news that the halfling had been captured by the Divine Army. He even thought that it was about time for GAAP to do this because he didn't have much time to live. The halfling must have known that this was going to be his last hurrah, so he destroyed and took as many people as he could with him to the afterlife. The king of the High Elves looked at the halfling with his arms crossed over his chest. He had initially wanted to rescue GAAP, but after hearing his confession, he knew that the halfling had already resolved to make the Divine Empire his grave. "I'm sorry for leaving the guild and not telling you anything," JAP sighed as he patted Lux's waist. "But this is as far as I go. I have nothing more to teach you. I'm sure that in time, you will surpass me and make your mark in history." "No, scratch that. You have already made your mark in history by being here. Everyone now knows who you are, which will give you a lot of trouble in the future." The halfling smiled as a few more wrinkles appeared on his face. "Master, I meant to tell you this as a surprise," Lux said as he did his best to prevent his voice from breaking. "But since things have already progressed this far, I want you to know that." JP held up a hand in order to stop Lux from continuing what he was about to say. "I know that she is safe inside Blackfire." JP looked at his disciple with a grateful gaze. "This is also why I have resolved myself to do this. This will be my final gift to her." Lux was surprised because he didn't know how GAAP found out that his master's soul was recovering inside Blackfire. Seeing the surprise on his disciple's face, GAAP wasn't able to stop himself from chuckling. "I am not stupid, Lux," GAAP said in a teasing tone. "After everything that happened in the Necromancer's ancestral lands, it was very easy to connect the dots. Since you are a kind and caring person, I would have been very disappointed if you hadn't even tried to save her from her current condition." I often tell Asmodeus that you are not suited to be a necromancer. But lo and behold, even the heavens proved me wrong. My one and only disciple in the world has become a necromancer of heaven, the first of its kind. And yet, these snot-nosed puss*es branded you as a heretic so that you would not have the time to grow and become who you are truly meant to be. JAP smiled and looked at the Supremes and Saints who had stopped their attacks and encircled him and his disciple, preventing them from leaving this place alive. The halfling then glanced at Hannah, whose tears were already falling down her beautiful face. Lux, take care of Hannah, JP said softly. She might have thought that she was the last member of my covenant. But truth be told, she is the first and only member of my covenant. Baal and the rest belong to my master, and they have protected me all these years in memory of her. Hannah, who never knew that she was JAP's one and only covenant member, knelt and hugged the halfling before breaking down into sobs. Silly girl, why are you crying? JAP asked as she patted the beautiful fox lady's head. We are in the middle of the battlefield, and you are crying like this? You are making me lose face. Although JAP was complaining, his gaze was filled with affection and gentleness. Lux, who suddenly felt that the Supremes and the Saints were about to make their move, raised his head to look at them. Master, I know that you have already resolved yourself, but this place is simply too filthy to become your tomb, Lux stated. A pigsty is 100 times better than this. JAP laughed heartily as more wrinkles appeared on his face. Even though he now looked old and decrepit, his laughter sounded so young and filled with mirth. You're probably right, JAP stated, but I have already decided. Also, the halfling's gaze landed on the oracle, who was at the center of the saints that she commanded. As your master, take Hannah and leave this place. There is one more B*** that I have to kill, JAP declared. Lux, this is my last order as your master. Take Hannah and leave this place. The half-elf didn't say anything as he followed his master's gaze, locking his sight on the oracle in the sky. Master, I will not let you die here, Lux said firmly. Since we are short on time, let's go all out. Lux then shifted his attention to the Dragon King and the steward of the Crystal Palace. He had seen Valerie, Ali, and Ari beside the Dragon King, and he smiled in their direction. The half-elf then shifted his gaze to Or and gave the Dragon Prince a brief nod. All who don't want to be dragged into this battle should leave, Lux declared. I am not confident that you will not get hurt in the aftermath. The Dragon King smirked, before waving his hand. A moment later, a transparent golden dome appeared around him and his entourage. This dome then flew a few miles away from the Divine Empire, but those inside it could still see what was happening inside the city. The steward of the Crystal Palace opened her fan, and a crystal dome appeared around her people. Like the Dragon King's golden dome, this crystal dome flew away in a safe distance from the city. The other Supremes and the Saints did something similar and left the city. Victor dragged his son, Tristan, who still couldn't believe that his sister's fiancé was the Necromancer of Heaven, whom everyone had started talking about several months ago. Soon, only the Divine Army and their allies were left inside the city. 5 Supremes and hundreds of Saints, all facing a halfling and a half-elf, whom they had branded as heretics. Lux, I'm serious, you should leave, JP said. He was no longer smiling, which meant that he really didn't want his disciple to involve himself with his last battle. Too late, Master, Lux said. Do you really think that they will let me walk out of this place easily? GAP rolled his eyes at the half-elf. How could he not know that the red-headed teenager had many ways to escape this encirclement? If Lux wasn't certain of his chances, he wouldn't have come to this place to rescue him. Although he was truly grateful and very touched by his disciple's gesture, he also felt helpless. The half-elf could be really stubborn at times. Fine, AP stated as patted the dust on his robes. Just try not to die, okay? Of course, Lux replied. The two gave each other a long glance before both of them raised their hands at the same time. Rise! Dark clouds spread above the Divine Empire as countless undead emerged around the 2 necromancers. Lux had already summoned his 2 clones, and they, too, summoned their undead legion. As if waiting for that moment, a dracolic descended from the heavens and opened its wings wide. The Dragon King of Karshvar Draconis, his right-hand woman, Lady Faustina, as well as the saints of the Dragon Kingdom, looked at the dracolic with a frown. "He looks familiar," Lady Faustina muttered. "Of course, he is familiar." The Dragon King of Karshvar Draconis looked at the dracolic with a solemn expression on his face. "That is none other than the brother of the former Dragon King who disappeared during the Abyssal invasion. It seems like he really died, and this half-elf managed to discover his remains." The saints of Karshvar Draconis all gasped in shock after hearing their king's revelation. The dragons and dragonborns hated necromancers who dared to revive the bodies of the dragons who had passed away. This was why the dragon graveyards in the Dragon Kingdom were heavily guarded, preventing any necromancer from slipping through their defenses. Perhaps they could still somewhat tolerate it if the dragon that was revived was one of the wandering dragons that usually explored the world. But reviving the corpse of a member of the royal family was the greatest of taboos. Any necromancer who was found guilty of this crime would be executed on the spot. "Your Majesty, this..." One of the saints of Karshvar Draconis looked at his king askance. "There's no need for you to concern yourself about this," the Dragon King stated. "If he manages to escape this place alive, I will consider him absolved of his crime. That is, if he can escape this place." The Dragon King could see the invisible, magical weave that was swirling around the Divine Empire. The sovereign of the Divine Army had finally activated a surefire way to prevent anyone from teleporting away from the battlefield. 936. Any spatial ability and spatial treasures that allowed the owner to travel short or long distances in an instant were nullified. But Lux and JAP weren't thinking about these things. After summoning all of their subordinates, the Dracolic activated his Summon Undead Legion, doubling Lux's and GAP's army in an instant. "Kill!" the two necromancers ordered at the same time, and their minions surged forth like a black wave of death that would annihilate anything it touched. At first, the Supremes thought that the undead army would be coming for them. However, it didn't take them long to realize that the undead armies were actually ordered to destroy the entire city, trampling it to the ground. "You dare!" the sovereign of the Divine Army roared as he raised his hands, gathering divine power that would wipe out all the abominations in front of him in an instant. Ultimate Grand Cross. A radiance that covered the entire city descended from the heavens. This skill was only meant to kill the undead, as well as any other spectral creatures who had no true body or form. When the light receded, everyone was shocked to see that the undead army was unharmed. The Dracolic who had shielded JP and Lux with his wings smiled and said, "Ah, vitamin D." Avernus looked at the sovereign of the Divine Army and said, "Good for the skin and bones. You're not half bad for a lowlander scum. At least you have your use." The sovereign of the Divine Army almost spat a mouthful of blood after hearing the Dracolica's insulting words. He had known that Lux was immune to divine and light magic, but he didn't expect that even his army and allies would be unaffected by one of the strongest wide-area attacks that he could unleash. The Dracolic chuckled as he looked at the divine city around him. "This place looks bland," Avernus stated. "Time to heat things up." The Dracolic soared towards the sky and shouted with arrogance, "From death's embrace, I rise with fire and bone. As Avernus, I claim my rightful throne." The gate of hell opened wide in the center of the divine city, and the denizens of hell poured out in the thousands. The first thing they did was to unleash hell flames on their surroundings, burning the city to the ground. The Dracolica's contemptuous laughter spread in the surroundings for a few seconds before it unleashed a dragon breath that burnt the outer edges of the city. It was at this moment when the five Supremes and the Saints finally made their move and engaged their enemies with the intention of annihilating all of them. "Since it has come to this, let's not hold back any longer," the Beast King, who was one of the allies of the Divine Army, roared. "Fine," the Divine Sovereign said through gritted teeth. He would rather be the one to destroy the divine city than let the monsters trample on their pride. "Focus your attacks on those two heretics," the Supreme of the Lizard Folk shouted. "Time it in 5-second intervals." Raising his hand, The supreme of the lizard folk summoned a giant spear blazing with green flames. The beast king then gathered his power in his two hands, preparing to unleash an attack that would wipe the divine city from the face of the world. The sovereign of the divine army clapped thrice, and a giant sword that crackled with lightning appeared above his head. The two remaining supremes also prepared their coup de grace, which would instantly wipe out the living and the dead who were present before their eyes. Master, I think I forgot something back in my guild headquarters, Lux said as he scratched his head. Be right back. The corner of JP's lips twitched as he looked at his disciple in disbelief. Earlier, he was asking Lux to leave him, but the latter was adamant about staying. Now that their enemies no longer planned to hold back, the half-elf was telling him that he had forgotten something back at his guild headquarters? Bullsh *T. A laugh escaped Lux's face after seeing his master's dumbfounded face. Just as the halfling was about to order Antero to protect both of them, Blackfire appeared beside Lux. The half-elf then lightly knocked on the coffin's lid. Grandmaster, your disciples are getting bullied, Lux said. A little help, please? A moment later, the lid of the black coffin opened, showing nothing but a dark exterior that seemed endless. Someone dares to bully my disciples? Courting death, suddenly, a pale and delicate hand reached out and held onto the edge of the coffin. GAP's eyes widened, and his jaw dropped after seeing an enchanting elf, who seemed to have just stepped out of a fairy tale book, appear in front of him. Hirswith reached out her hand and closed GAP's mouth, which was wide open, before lightly patting the halfling's head with love and affection. She then looked at the Supremes and the saints that were floating in the sky and sneered. I'm back, you cunts, Hirswith declared with a devilish smile on her extremely beautiful face. Missed me? I'm back, you cunts. Missed me? The Supremes, who were just about to unleash their ultimate attacks, paused when their gaze landed on the extremely beautiful elf who had countless suitors before her death. Her suitors were not limited to saints. Some of them were Supremes. This was proof of the level of attractiveness of Hirswith, whom many considered to be one of the top, if not the #1 beauty in Elysium. It didn't matter how vulgar her mouth was. Everyone turned a blind eye to it. If they could make the enchanting elf their lover, they wouldn't mind if she cursed at them, especially if it were while they were pinning her voluptuous body beneath them on their bed. But something was very different about the Hirswith in front of them compared to how they remembered her in the past. Although they never thought it was possible, the seductive elf's beauty had transcended to the next level, making her look like a divine being that had stepped out of a fairy tale book. All the men couldn't take their eyes off her, and even the ladies couldn't help but feel attracted to her. Hirswith wasn't aware that she had practically charmed almost everyone that had laid their eyes on her by just breathing. She was solely focused on thinking about how she would capture the Oracle, who was at the very back of the Divine Army's formation, and slap the *T silly until she called her mommy. The lips of the Elven King trembled as he looked at his daughter, whom he hadn't seen for many years. At first, he thought that he was just dreaming or perhaps seeing an illusion that the half-elf had conjured before he was drowned by the attacks of the 5 Supremes, who decided to not hold their full powers back any longer. Even in the face of 5 Supremes and hundreds of saints, Hirswith fearlessly stood in front of her disciple and grand disciple with an arrogant look on her face. Is it really you, Hirswith? The sovereign of the Divine Army asked with a calm expression on his face. Instead of answering, Hirswith took a step forward, and 6 white, angelic wings unfurled behind her back. As darkness knocks on heaven's doors, the chosen one shall rise over darkened skies, Hirswith said as a pillar of light descended from the sky and shone upon her, making her look like a deity. Light and dark both intertwine. Thus are the makings of the divine. The beautiful elf lightly flapped her wings and hovered several meters in the air. In the past, you called me a heretic for looking for a different path for necromancers. A sweet smile appeared on Hirswith's lips as he looked at the sovereign of the Divine Army. And now, I will show you what a true heaven's necromancer is like. The divine city shook as the ground underneath Hirswith broke apart. A moment later, a giant skeleton hand broke through the ground and rose, holding the beautiful elf in the palm of its hand. A few seconds later, the rest of the gigantic skeleton, which was as tall as Antero, surfaced from the earth. The faces of the members of the divine army turned grim when they felt that the power being exuded from the giant skeleton was of the same level as a demigod. "Isn't she a beauty?" Hirswith asked. "This is the trump card I created, and she's called Deus Gigantia." Lux, who heard Hirswith's words, couldn't stop his lips from twitching. "Grandmaster, why are you so shameless?" Lux asked. "I am the one that created this skill. Why are you saying that you were the one that created it? This is a clear copyright violation." Hirswith chuckled after hearing Lux's complaints. "My grand disciple, I think you are having a very big misunderstanding," Hirswith replied. "What's yours is mine, and what's mine is only mine. Even if you are the one who created this skill, as your grandmaster, this skill is also something that belongs to me. I was the one who paved the road for the Heaven Necromancer class, so I call first dibs on everything that belongs to this branch of necromancy. You might be its progenitor, but I am its founder. Without me, you would not have stepped on this path. Don't worry. I will make it up to you later by letting you sleep on my thigh. Consider this as your reward for being a good boy." Ho ho ho. The half-elf almost spat blood after hearing his grandmaster's laughter. Although the latter said that she would reward him by letting him sleep on her thigh, that was like jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. The way she worded it could cause a great misunderstanding, which made all of Hirswith's past suitors lock their gazes onto his body. "Damn, what a lucky brat. I've been dreaming of those thighs since I was a teenager. Now that I'm old, I'm still dreaming of it. *T. I feel like I'm getting C*ked." Lux subconsciously shuddered when he felt the gazes that were filled with envy, jealousy, and killing intent aimed in his direction. The half-elf then glanced at his own master, JP, as if seeking him for support. "Give up," JP said with resignation. "That's just how Master does things." Lux shook his head and summoned his own Deus Gigantia. When the giant skeleton king rose up from the ground, it also held Lux in the palm of his hand. After being raised several meters into the air, Lux realized that his master's giant skeleton was actually a skeleton queen and not a skeleton king. The two skeleton sovereigns glanced at each other. "Good day we're having, don't you think?" the skeleton king said to the skeleton queen. "Indeed," the skeleton queen replied. "It's a good day to die." Lux had raised his rank to become an A ranker, so his Deus Gigantia was of the Calamity rank. As for Hirswith, she was now a bona fide demigod, so her Deus Gigantia was at the apex of the demigod rank. A/N, yes, she is now a demigod and not a supreme. Simply put, the Skeleton Queen was an Antero-level demigod. After defeating monsters and collecting as many beast cores as he could within the Lost Ark domain, Lux noticed something strange. The demigod who was on the broken black ship didn't stir even once, despite all the commotions that he had caused inside its territory. Because of this, he had sent one of his clones to investigate. Due to his new skill that gave him immunity to gravity changes, his clone didn't suffer from any penalty from the strong gravity that could have easily shattered the bones of those who approached the Lost Arkansas. When his clone entered the ship, Lux made a startling discovery. There was a divine creature that lay in the center of the ship, and it was none other than a seraphim. A six-winged divine angel from the heavens that had fallen to the mortal world. At first, Lux thought that the seraphim was sleeping, but after a closer inspection, he realized that the seraphim was actually dead. But since its body was filled with divinity, it didn't rot and even excluded a powerful pressure that prevented anyone from getting close to the corpse. The gravity inside the black ship was actually 50 times greater than the gravity of Elysium. This made it nearly impossible for anything to approach the body of the dead seraphim and survive. After this discovery, Lux's clone immediately summoned Blackfire so that it could absorb the fallen demigod, who still had its divine core intact. However, as soon as Blackfire absorbed the body of the seraphim, Hirswith's soul stirred, and she finally opened her eyes. Without a second thought, the beautiful elf merged with the body of the seraphim and asked Blackfire to help her refine it. Because of this, Hirswith was reborn as a true celestial, with the body of a seraphim and the strength of a demigod. An existence that shouldn't exist came into being. Are you ready to get F asterisk ked you bunch of puss asterisk yes? Hearswith asked. This lady will screw your twats 100 times over. The face of the oracle, who was at the very back of the formation, paled when she realized Hearswith's true rank and profession. The heavens are blind, Maeve muttered. How can they make someone as vulgar as her a necromancer of heaven? It doesn't make sense. The sovereign of the divine army, as well as the saints that were encircling the three necromancers, all agreed with their oracle's words. High above the heavens, Ariel averted his gaze and pretended that he didn't hear the oracle's words. Truth be told, the only reason why Hearswith didn't become a heavens necromancer in the first place was because of her vulgar mouth. Simply put, with how vulgar the beautiful elf was, she didn't meet the last condition to become a representative of heaven. How could heaven approve of a representative who could say such foul words with a straight face? But this condition was broken the moment Hearswith obtained the body of a divine being. Since the seraphim was already a celestial and was a chaste maiden even in death, the last condition that prevented Hearswith from acquiring the power of a heavens necromancer was nullified. Max, who was standing beside his troubled friend, could only chuckle with his arms crossed over his chest. It was very rare for the god of games to feel this embarrassed, which he found funny. After having her fill of spouting a litany of expletives, Hearswith finally stopped and smiled. I'll leave that bitch to the both of you, Hearswith stated. Don't make me lose face. You hear me? Yes, master, AP replied as he intended to use all of his lifespan for one last fight. Understood. Lux nodded. Hearswith smiled sweetly. This was probably the first and last time that the three of them would be fighting together. She gave her wrinkled disciple a sidelong glance and steeled her heart. Don't worry, GAAP, Hearswith said. Your master will make sure that half of them accompany you to the afterlife. With a wave of her hand, the skeleton queen summoned a death scythe. Her disciple had spent countless years trying to avenge her. The only thing she could do right now was to see it until the end. GAAP, do you remember what I told you when I first started teaching you how to become a necromancer? Hearswith asked. Yes, master, JP replied with a gentle smile on his face. How could I forget? You asked me to live a great life and die a great death. Hearswith nodded. Well said. Without another word, the land of the divine empire shook as the three necromancers commanded their gigantic golems to unleash hell on earth. Those who were watching the battle from the side felt their hearts shudder inside their chests. They never thought that they would live to see the day when the divine army of light would find themselves losing ground against three necromancers. However, the might of these three transcended the norms. Hearswith, Antero, and the Skeleton Queen were more than enough to handle the five Supremes, who suddenly found themselves being pushed back by the beautiful elf's relentless attack. In fact, the spectators once again distanced themselves by several miles and were using artifacts that would allow them to watch the battle from that great distance. A battle between a demigod and multiple Supremes was not a joke. A stray attack coming from any of them could instantly obliterate an entire city. If such an attack were to suddenly fly in their direction, they would turn into a meat paste in the blink of an eye. Beast King's Wrath. The Beast King unleashed a beam of destruction toward the Skeleton Queen who had chosen to deal with him and the Lizard King at the same time. The Lizard King also unleashed the giant spear in the heavens, aiming to destroy the demigod in front of him. But just as their attacks were about to land on the Skeleton Queen's body, something unexpected happened. The beam that the Beast King had fired at Skeleton Queen rebounded toward the Lizard King, which the Lizard King attempted to evade by distancing himself as fast as he could. However, the beam was extremely fast, and the Lizard King had no choice but to activate one of his defensive artifacts to mitigate the blow. He knew how powerful the Beast King's attack was. Taking it head-on would give him a serious injury. If he got a bit unlucky, he could even receive a fatal injury that would end his life then and there. After the Lizard King lost his concentration and control over the giant spear, the Skeleton Queen swooped in and deflected it using her death scythe, causing the spear to fall to the ground, resulting in a giant fissure that extended several miles. This attack had effectively destroyed half of the divine city, making the sovereign's eyes turn bloodshot. But there was nothing he could do about it aside from resuming his fight against Hirswith, who had a bored expression on her face. At that exact moment, a pillar of light shot out from the center of the divine city and flew towards the heavens. A moment later, a very old man with a few wrinkles on his face showed up with a grim look on his face. For teenagers, who seemed to be in their late teens, stood beside him. "Founder!" the sovereign of the divine army shouted. "Did you manage to save them?" The old man nodded. "The apostles are safe." The old man then glared in Hirswith's direction as brilliant flames surrounded his body. He was none other than the founder of the divine army, the supreme who created one of the strongest organizations from scratch. He had disappeared after passing the reins to the current sovereign who ruled in his stead. However, what people didn't know was that he was busy creating an army of divine warriors that would take the world by storm. This was the Apostle Project, a project that would give apostles the power of a supreme for a short period of time. However, after the duration of this ability was over, that person would die, not even leaving a corpse behind. "You sure are a troublesome heretic," the founder of the divine army stated. "Why can't you just stay dead?" "I can say the same about you, old man," Hirswith sneered. "Why can't you just roll over and die?" "Impudent woman." "Delusional old man." Without another word, the founder and the sovereign teamed up and clashed against Hirswith, making the beautiful elf smile. Truth be told, she was waiting for the founder of the divine army to make his appearance. He was one of the people that Hirswith wanted to kill, and now that he was here, she could finally have her own personal revenge, for the old bastard's command was the root cause of her death. While Antero was dealing with the remaining Supremes, Lux and JAP, alongside the members of their covenant, fought against the hundreds of saints who were doing their best to land a killing blow on the two necromancers, who were only an apostle and a high ranker. But this proved to be a difficult task due to the countless undead monsters that were attacking them from all sides like rabid dogs. After becoming an A ranker, Lux's Deus Gigantia had stepped into the Calamity rank. It was not only his Skeleton King that received a power-up. The Dracolic, Avernus, had also stepped into the Calamity rank, and his fighting prowess had leaped to a frightening level. As a former demigod, Avernus had fought on the front lines against the invasion of the Abyss. There, he fought hundreds of Calamity-ranked monsters, as well as the demigods who commanded them. Although his strength had regressed to the Calamity rank, his battle experience was still there, and the saints found this to be quite troublesome. "This is what I'm looking for." Shaun, the juggernaut of Agartha, grinned from ear to ear as he smashed his fist into one of the saints of the divine army and sent the latter flying. "This is what I've been missing in my life." Swirling his axe around his body, Shaun charged at the group of saints as if he were dealing with low-ranking monsters. He was like a miniature sun that blazed brightly on the battlefield, which caught the eyes of several of the powerhouses who were spectating the battle from afar. As powerhouses in their own right, they had known most of the saints that were worth knowing. Since they didn't recognize Shaun, they wondered where such a powerful saint had come from, especially since he seemed to be only a step away from becoming a supreme. Cleo, who was also fighting alongside the juggernaut of Agartha, couldn't help but curse Lux inwardly for dragging her into a fight that she didn't sign up for. However, since she was already here, she did her best to not die and supported the undead monsters from behind. Black Fire was also in the midst of battle, summoning its own army of undead and saints to show their terrifying might. The King of Exiles, as well as his subordinates, fought as one, targeting one saint at a time. Lux wanted these powerhouses to retain their ranks, so he made sure to look for Calamity-ranked beast cores that would prevent them from regressing. The saints, who were singled out by this team of undead saints, found themselves unable to fight back and were instantly crippled or neutralized. Saw this feel their scalps tingling. But aside from the King of Exiles and his subordinates, there were the Black Coffin would then swallow these near-death saints and add them to its ever-growing collection, which made those who saw this feel their scalps tingling. But aside from the King of Exiles and his subordinates, there were other powerhouses that were duking it out with the main force of the Divine Army. The Black Ogre and the Golden-Eyed Naga, which Aurora had cursed, were also in the midst of battle. Lux had returned to his guild headquarters for a brief moment in order to bring Aurora to the Lost Ark domain. This allowed her to increase her rank and become a D ranker, allowing her to dispel the bad luck of others who were affected by her curse. As a D ranker, Aurora could remove the bad luck of 20 creatures every month. Because of this, she had helped Blackfire undo the curse on the four-armed Black Ogre and the golden-eyed Naga. But Blackfire proposed to do an experiment, which Aurora wholeheartedly agreed to. As long as she was able to help Lux, she was willing to go above and beyond to make it happen. What Blackfire asked Aurora for was to help the two Calamity-ranked monsters gain an aura of bad luck that worked only against their enemies. It meant that anyone within a certain range of the two monsters should suffer from bad luck, while the two monsters in question would not be affected by it. After more than a week of trial and error, Aurora and Blackfire managed to do just that. Now the Black Ogre and the golden-eyed Naga were exuding an aura of bad luck, exclusively affecting only their enemies. The only downside was that the aura of bad luck that they projected wasn't permanent and would only last for an hour at most. Even so, having bad luck in the heat of battle was something that most people didn't want to experience. Because of this, the two Calamity-ranked monsters were able to overpower the groups of saints, who suddenly found themselves at a great disadvantage. Not far from these two monsters, Leonidas, the gladiators, and the bounty hunters were riding on the undead raptors that Lux had brought back from the Lost Ark domain. These beasts were quite fast, allowing Leonidas and his crew to deal with the rankers and high rankers of the Divine Army. Lux's named creatures and Covenant members fought not far from their master. This was especially true for Asmodeus, Pazuzu, and Orion, who were always at the ready to defend Lux against potential sneak attacks from any direction. Diablo, whose blade reaped the lives of his enemies like he was just cutting grass, was getting stronger with each passing minute. His fiery eyes burned brightly as he fought on the front lines, ensuring that the enemies wouldn't reach his master no matter what. While this battle was taking place, Lux and JP slowly made their way toward the Oracle of Light, to which the master and disciple pair had a vendetta. Even if Hirswith didn't order them to deal with her, the two would definitely target her nevertheless. While this was happening, a few of the Supremes who were spectating the battlefield eyed each other. None of them had reached their rank because they were righteous. It was because they were willing to do anything, which allowed them to transcend to the peak of their world. "This is getting interesting," the Dragon King commented as he eyed the Supremes in the distance. "It looks like things are going to become more intense moving forward." The Dragon King smirked internally. He had come here to watch an execution, and yet, what he was seeing right now was more entertaining and exciting. Not all Supremes or factions got along with each other. Most of the time, they were always at each other's necks, just like the relationship between Karshvar Draconis and the Crystal Palace. The Dragon King was certain that if a small pebble were to fall off the peak of a mountain, it would create an avalanche that would drag all of them into this all-out battle, whether they liked it or not. "Die!" One of the saints of the Divine Army slashed at the half-elf, whom they attacked as a group. They knew that the situation wasn't favorable to them, so they threw away their pride and formed groups in order to deal with Lux and GAAP, preventing them from working together. Fighting against hundreds of saints wasn't an easy task, even for the two necromancers, who were surrounded by countless undead monsters. The sword strike by the saint was timed perfectly. His comrades had worked hard in order to create this opening, while Lux was busy dealing with the countless attacks that were coming from every direction. The saint's legendary weapon split the half-elf's body into two parts, which made Valerie almost faint from shock. The saint was expecting a blood mist to spray in the air after his deadly strike, but none of that happened. Instead, the half-elf he had split in half turned into particles of light, which made his eyes widen in shock. His momentary surprise created an opening for Avernus' fiery breath that hit him in his blind spot, making him scream in pain. The saint managed to survive the dragon's breath due to his protective charms, but his luck ran out the moment Diablo appeared on his back and pierced his body with the Death Sovereign's flaming sword. Hellfire Annihilation. Diablo's attack, which had now been raised drastically due to the number of deaths in the battlefield, was the straw that finally broke the camel's back. The saint spat a mouthful of blood before his body fell forward. At that exact moment, a black coffin appeared in front of the dying saint and swallowed him whole. Blackfire didn't linger and disappeared once again. There were so many high rankers and saints who were dying in the battlefield that the black coffin was having a field day, absorbing them all. Amidst the chaos, 3 dwarf assassins were busy reaping lives left and right, helping the undead army make small work of the low rankers that made up the bulk of their army. Sid and Scarlet were now both C rankers, making them very deadly on the battlefield. The two had honed their assassination skills to the limit, allowing them to maximize the chaos in their surroundings to sneak attack their opponents from their blind spots. Sean, who was Sid's friend and had been subjugated by Lux to become his spy within Twilight Reign, had been turned into a half-life zombie. This gave him the strength of an undead, while still being alive at the same time. Although he wasn't as powerful as Sid, who was now a Damper, and Scarlet, who had become a Cambrian, the D-ranker assassin was pulling his own weight on the battlefield. Sean was using hit-and-run tactics, targeting the low-ranking officers of the Divine Army. Because of this, the chain of command was a mess, and everyone was just fighting freely, without a commanding officer's command to organize them. Lux, who had swapped places with one of his clones to avoid a fatal blow, pressed his palms on the ground. A moment later, 3 tombstones rose from the ground around him, summoning ancient ghouls to fight for him. The ground shook under his feet, as his plagued deathworm rose up on the surface and used its body to smash the soldiers of the Divine Army who were fighting against the undead. The beauty of being a necromancer was that the longer the battle progressed, the more deadly they became. Not only were they able to summon countless undead, they were also capable of raising the dead bodies of the creatures that had fought against them. Thousands of zombified soldiers hacked, bit, clawed, and crushed their former comrades without showing any mercy. This unending cycle of death and revival made those who witnessed them feel their hearts turn cold due to how dreadful it was. Right now, it was hard to tell who was winning. Just one mistake and the half-elf and halfling could die in the hands of their enemies due to the difference in ranks. Hannah, who had also unsealed her true strength, stepped into the Calamity rank, blocking the attacks that were aimed in Lux's direction. The Fox's lady's greatest strength was support, and although there was a spatial restriction that prevented her from teleporting herself, as well as her allies on the battlefield, it didn't stop her from distorting the space around her enemies and crush them with a vengeance. At that moment, Lux heard the whistling of the wind. The half-elf didn't hesitate to fly away from where he stood. A second later, a purple arrow pierced the spot where he was standing earlier, which made his face turn grim. The arrow that had embedded itself on the ground made everything within 100-meter radius of it crumble into dust, including the undead that were within its range. The half-elf heard more whistling sounds coming in his direction, which forced him to take evasive actions. However, he found out that even after doing his best to evade the barrage of arrows, each and every one of them was mere seconds away from hitting his body. He didn't need to check to know who was firing these arrows from the rear. There was only one person that had the power to predict his every move, and that was none other than the Oracle of Light. This be *TCH. Lux cursed internally as he desperately tried to evade the Oracle's attacks, while shortening the distance between them. Unfortunately, the Wall of Saints, who were protecting the Oracle, was a big hurdle to overcome, especially when all of their high-ranking strikers were busy dealing with strong contenders as well. At that moment, Lux felt his sixth sense scream at him, as if telling him to retreat as far as he could. Trusting his instincts, the half-elf backed away, which made the Oracle breathe a sigh of relief. Descending from the sky to protect her were the 4 teenagers who were with the founder of the Divine Army when he made his appearance. Similar to GAAP, Lux could tell the 4 teenagers were only apostles. Even so, the threat he felt from them was higher than the saints that he was currently dealing with. The 4 teenagers were the lucky ones who had managed to survive the Apostle Project. These 4 might only be of the Apostle rank. However, they could, at any given time, burn their lives in order to jump to the supreme rank, making them expendable powerhouses that could devastate the enemies of the Divine Army of Light. Even if they could only attack once before they died, this was more than enough to make Lux wary of them. The Oracle, who had now found the opportunity to eliminate GAAP and Lux at the same time, gave an order to the 4 teenagers. "All of you, kill that half-elf first," the Oracle of Light ordered. "Your Excellency, how about the halfling?" one of the teenage boys asked. "Should we ignore him?" The Oracle nodded. "That halfling is only a step away from dying. It will not be long before he croaks, so ignore him and focus your attention on that brat." The 4 teenagers all glanced at Lux at the same time, making the half-elf's face turn extremely solemn. Without even speaking a word, the 4 teenagers flew towards him as they unlocked the seals that were placed on their bodies. Immediately, the domineering power of 4 Supremes spread in the surroundings, making the Saints and Supremes of the other factions look at them in disbelief. "To think that they managed to succeed," the Dragon King muttered. "The balance of power in the land will start to shift once again." The Elf King, as well as Lady Augustina, nodded their heads in agreement. An organization that had several Supremes under their wing was unheard of. In the eyes of others, Karsvar Draconis, the Crystal Palace, Agartha, and Asporfrieden were the only places that had Supremes in them. However, if one was to carefully ponder the geopolitical arrangement of the lands, they would find that it was impossible for these factions to only have Supremes in them. This meant that aside from the rulers, who were quite powerful in their own right, they also had subordinates, who were just as powerful, and perhaps even more powerful than them. This was why the balance had been maintained for the past hundreds of years. With the Divine Empire's success in their experiments, those who were secretly gloating about the destruction of the Divine City found themselves feeling anxious. There were many people and factions who didn't want the Divine Army to continuously expand their territory, as well as absorb various kingdoms under their guise of protection. They were like leeches that were very hard to pry off of your body, especially after they managed to sink their teeth into your domain. These same factions were now looking at the 4 teenagers, who were exuding the power of Supremes. Now that 4 more Supremes had appeared on the battlefield, the earlier advantages that Lux, GAP, and Hearswith had were starting to disappear one by one. While the 4 Supremes were now about to clash against the half-elf, the Oracle of Light knocked an arrow of destruction on her bow. Using her power to predict Lux would go next, she took aim with a sneer on her face. Although she couldn't use her divination to predict how the half-elf would survive the 4 Supremes, who had locked onto him while forming an encirclement, she was certain of one thing. As long as she timed it right, her arrow would find its mark. And when that happened, she would get rid of the bastard half-elf who had dared to defy her organization over and over again. While nearly everyone was watching with bated breath for what was going to happen next, a middle-aged man disappeared from the congregation of Supremes in the distance. No one saw him vanish, for they were paying extra attention to the half-elf, who was currently thinking of ways to escape his current situation.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe.